Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for coming to today's session with Tish. Tish is from Queensland in Australia, that's correct? Yes, yes.
I live in Queensland, yes.
Yes, she lives in Queensland. It's a bit like I live in Hong Kong, but I feel I'm still from Australia. So, but it's fantastic looking at the EFL classroom and with IELTS and areas like that, which is obviously huge across the world now with people doing different languages and needing to learn, especially learning English language, and it's such a huge topic across all the areas, especially here in Asia. So Tish, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wendy, and thanks for joining those who are live here with us today and those who are going to listen afterwards. I'm a little nervous, so bear with me. I'm going to turn my webcam off though, because I think it might be affecting the quality of the sound. And Celine and Wendy, if you can't hear me very well, just let me know, pop a message up in the chat there and I'll move the microphone closer to my mouth. Okay, so I'm going to talk about using Moodle in an English language classroom. Great, that's good to know. This sounds much better. I used this when I was teaching at university here in Queensland. I've been an English language teacher now for a number of years, and one of the things that we often do in the classroom is to cut up little bits of paper and first photocopy them and then cut them up and then organize them and then give them to the students to manipulate, and then they use them to join words together or join sentences together or ideas together and maybe talk about them. And then unfortunately those pieces of paper just usually go into the rubbish bin. And it does take quite a bit of organization to do that sort of thing. And as much as I love doing it and I love manipulating things in my hand and for students to do that, it does take a lot of time and effort. The effort is not worth the output, if that makes sense. So instead of doing that in the classroom recently, I decided I would use Moodle to not replicate, because it won't be exactly the same, but to change the activities a bit, just to give the students something different to do. Different way of doing it. So the reason that I chose to do this is because it came down to preparation time. So the great thing about this is that it was photocopy free. Didn't have to worry about queuing up for the photocopier. Didn't have to worry about all the problems that can happen with photocopiers. Just checking that you can hear me okay. I'm going to turn mine off and then on again. Sorry, I'm getting my own feedback. Okay. Sorry, I was just getting my own audio back to me as a echo, so it was a little disturbing. So how's the sound now? Is it okay? Okay, great. So photocopiers, yes, great, love them, sometimes hate them most of the time. So so doing this activity meant that I didn't have to worry about using the photocopier. So it saved me a lot of time. I didn't have to cut up all those little bits of paper, and I could edit it easily beforehand. Sometimes when you go to photocopy something, you know, then you see something's not exactly the way you want it, and then you have to print it out again and then photocopy it again, and it's a pain. But on the Moodle site, easy. I could just change it whenever I wanted to, even during the session, during class, it was fine. I could get the students to do individual activities. We do a lot of group activities in class, which is great. They have their place, but individual activities I think are fun to do as well. And the students could get an immediate response. They didn't even have to wait for me to stand up and walk over to their desk and give them the response. I could see it as it came up on my computer in class, and I could even shout out to them across the other students, hey, great job, Mario, I see that you've done really well, Lena, this is good, and it gave the other students encouragement as well to do their. I could use it in class to hide and show things as I needed to. So I'd hide some of the activities until all the students had completed the first one, and then I'd show the second activity or the third activity when I was ready to. They previously had booklets that were handed out to them, and often they would flip forward to the next section before finishing the first section, or they would finish early and then move on to the next activity before I was ready for them to do so. So by using the hide and show function, it really meant that I could control what they could do and what they could see. I could also share the activities that they'd done using a projector that was connected to my computer as well. So that was really helpful, and I'll give you an example of how I did that later. I could edit it during class if I needed to. I noticed sometimes as I was working that things weren't exactly the way I wanted, so I'd quickly make some changes to it. And it was trackable too. I could see which students were doing what and when they'd submitted something. So it was really handy for me to see who was doing what and not even have to roam around the classroom too much, which at the time I was about between 25 and 30 weeks pregnant, so it was quite nice not to have to get up and walk around the classroom. Plus it was a fairly small room as well, and there wasn't really a lot of room to walk around, so it was very handy for me at that time. The other thing about it was that there was no waste. Didn't have to worry about those bits of paper going in the bin. And then I can reuse the activity again the next time I have that class. So I really thought it was a very worthwhile thing to invest a little bit of time into to set up. So how I did this was that I just got a Moodle cloud site and popped my things that I needed to on there. And then the students, I gave them the URL and then they logged on using their own devices. And that worked out pretty well. Sometimes they had a bit of a challenge getting to it in the first place, but it was great to see the students collaborating together and helping each other to find what they needed to get to the right site or to get to the right activity. And it was a really lovely class that I had, and they had a really nice collaborative work ethic, and they like to help each other out. So the things that I used, the activities I used were quiz and feedback. Now I really like quiz. I like to use it a lot. And I hadn't used feedback very much before, so this was the first time using feedback for this kind of activity, and the first time using quiz as well in a classroom setting where I was with the students at the time, and we were working on things kind of live together. So, do you have any questions before I move on to talk about the quiz and the feedback activities that I did about setting it up or why I chose to use Moodle? If you have any questions, pop them in the chat and I will answer them now, or I'll come back to them later. So I'm going to talk about how I used quiz. I want to show you some of the mistakes or learning experiences that I had setting it up. The students, they did have a handout to go with the quiz, so not everything was on the computer or on their devices. They did have a handout, and then I actually gave them the proper handout that we were supposed to at the end as well. So the handout had the reading text on it, so they were using the text and then they were answering the questions on their devices. So we had two reading comprehension activities. The first one, and often in English language teaching, when you give a student a reading task, you do the first task is for just they're just reading it very quickly to get some overall idea about the reading text. And then the second time they read it is for detail. They're answering some more detailed questions about the ideas that are in that text. So for the first reading comprehension, I chose to do a multiple choice with multiple answers. And for the second one, I chose to do a cloze activity with short answer questions. So this was my the first one, reading comprehension 1, a very imaginative title. And they just had to select what were the correct answers. And they can see that it is that they need to get 8 correct. Wouldn't mind being able to remove this, but I don't know how to do it. So if you have any idea, then let me know. I also had it set up so that they could check their questions before submitting it. Mainly, I didn't want to receive hundreds of submissions, and it wasn't really. It's not a test. It's just a activity. So it didn't matter that they were checking it again and again and again before submitting it. That was absolutely fine for me. So I set it up as adaptive mode, no penalties. This is how I set up a lot of my quizzes. Again, because it's not really a test, it's an activity, and I'm happy for students generally to keep trying until they get the right answer. I also set it up so they could see whether it was correct at the time, what their marks were, and if there was any specific or general feedback. I usually have my quizzes set up like this. And I also had shuffle within questions, just in case they were looking over their friends' shoulders. Again, for this activity, if they were, it wasn't the end of the world. I wasn't too concerned about it. In terms of editing the question, they would get no marks for an incorrect answer, and they would get 12.5% for a correct answer, which would make up to 8 marks overall. So this, I thought, great, fantastic, this is how I want it, the students can check, and this is wonderful. And they get the feedback at the end. But I didn't realise until students were fiddling with it, and students being students, you know, they do what they can, and that's also fine. But if you mark them all correct, then you would get all the right answers. So this is not what I wanted. Unfortunately, it didn't work out the way that I wanted it to here. So I went back and edited the settings, and I took off the part that showed whether it was correct. And I kept the question the same here. And it looked good, but unfortunately, if you tick them all still, you would still come out as 8 out of 8. And I can see by looking at what the student has done, they've done too many, they've ticked too many. But if I wanted to look at the quiz, if I wanted to review the attempts quickly, then it would be wouldn't show me what I wanted to see. It would show me that they were all correct, but the students just ticked every single one of them. So I went back and changed it again. I kept the weather correct out of it, but I realized that I could make this one here negative. So I changed it to negative 12.5. This is not something I normally would do. I don't know, I guess I'm kind of too nice in some ways, and I don't like to put negative things in. But for this purpose, it was necessary. And hooray, if they tick them all, they still only got partially correct. So they didn't get all of the questions correct. And if they ticked the right ones, then they would get 8 out of 8. So yay, I was really happy with that. Definitely trial and error, and it took a while to get it right. And it took some students doing it to help me get it right. But it was the class that I was in, like they knew what my situation was, and they were really happy to help me work through it as long as it helped them as well. So that was my experience with using quiz. So if you want to have that kind of quiz set up, then this is what I would recommend you do. Do you have any questions about that before I go on to talking about the next part? So the next one I set up was a close question activity, and I really like close questions because I can put several questions in one question. I don't have to fiddle around with lots of questions, but it does take a little bit of setup. So for this one, I decided to make it deferred feedback. I didn't want them to check it because they were short answer questions where the student could have any number of short answers or their own answer. And I had it set up so if they put their own answer in, then it would show 50% partially correct. And I wanted them to put their own answers in if it wasn't in my bank of answers, and that was fine. But if they had clicked check, then it would have shown up as partially correct. And I didn't want to scare them off, to put them off, even though I was in the classroom telling them, it's okay, if it comes up partially correct. But, you know, sometimes they don't always listen. So I was happy in this situation to have deferred feedback. This is how I set up my short answer questions. I had as the first answer, I had answers will vary. So that means if it did show up, they did click on or highlight to see the correct answer, there was no real correct answer shown. I then had all the other answers that were possible from the text or ones that I was thinking that could be possible in as the possible answers, and I just repeated the same thing over and over here. For a wild card, 50%, and then I had with the feedback after that, your answer will be checked by your teacher. So if they had the 50%, if they had their own answer, they would get some marks. It wasn't 0, but then I would go in and check it and make changes. I also set up general feedback just to remind them that, again, even though I had also said it to them, that I will check their answers. So, I wanted them to feel confident that they could submit their own answers, even if it wasn't one of the ones that I thought might be one they would say. So, student goes on. Thank you. Student goes on, they enter their answers, and then they submit it, and I review it, and they would review it as well, and they can see that this is not one of the answers that I thought was going to be something they would say changes in income, and also some examples, having a baby and living abroad. So what I do here now is I click on edit question, and I bring it up into a new window. So I right click new window, and then I use their answers to then add that to another answer possibility for them. I'm sorry, it's rather small there. So here I had changes in income, and I've added here changes in income. So then when they go to review it, and I go to review it, yay, it's considered now a correct answer. And now it's in there too, forever and ever. And next time another student does it and they write changes in income, then it comes up as one of the answers. You can end up with a massively long section here of all the possible things that a student might write, but that's okay. So in summary, to talk about using the quiz, just check your question behavior and review options and have a practice with that. Don't be afraid to use closed questions and utilize the feedback options. Use the students' answers to create new answers, new actions and possibilities, and use that second window to edit your questions. Have any questions about that? Okay, and now I'm going to show you how I used feedback. I used show and hide, so I didn't want the students to move on to the second and third activities until they had done the first one. So I just made it available for them to see and to do. And this activity, there's a text about gender, and I'll have it available to you after this recording, after this session as well. So if you want to have a go at doing it yourself, you're very welcome to do it. And the other activity as well will be available on this website. So if you want to play around and see how it goes, then please do so. So this was an activity reading about gender. And but before we started it, I wanted to have the students do a bit of an activity on word association. So I chose some words from the text, and one of the ones, for example, was that they said bouncing, and they used it to describe, well, which one do you think you would often hear bouncing with? Do you have bouncing with men, bouncing women, bouncing boys, bouncing girls, bouncing baby girls, or bouncing baby boys? Put your answer in the chat if you want to. You don't have to. Yeah, absolutely, Trish. Yeah. So often we do hear about bouncing baby boy. I guess it's the alliteration, and that was referred to in the text as well. They said bouncing baby boy. But my second language students probably knew the word bouncing, but hadn't heard about it in terms of being associated with a type of person, or particularly a baby, and usually a bouncing baby boy. So this activity was to get them thinking about these words and perhaps learning new vocabulary or learning new ways of using vocabulary. Aggressive as well was another one, and there were, I think, 20 words. And like I said, feel free to have a go at this activity afterwards. I did it for two reasons. One, because it could have been new vocabulary, and the other one is it could have been word association. And I was happy for them to talk about it with their partners, with the other students. That was fine. When I made up the feedback, I kept it anonymous because I thought it's not everybody feels confident about having their opinion shared by the teacher. So why don't we just keep it anonymous and they can put whatever they want to. And afterwards, I put the analysis up on the projector on the screen so that we could see what the students had chosen. And I know that perhaps sometimes they might have clicked the wrong button or they didn't have any idea, so they just clicked the first one, or that was okay as well. It was really just to get the discussion moving and to get them into the activity as a warmer for the main reading task. Then I got them to read the text. And then they answered another feedback with their opinions. And this was after the text. I was thinking about doing one where you have your opinion and then you read the text and then you do your opinion again. But I figured these guys, their opinions might not change that much, considering their age and the type of text that it was. So I was more than happy for them just to give their opinion afterwards. And then I put the opinions up on the board, up on the projector, and got them to talk about it in small groups. And again, it was still anonymous, so they didn't have to say, I think that most parents treat their sons and daughters differently, but they could say, well, the majority of people think that parents treat their sons and daughters differently, and perhaps they think this because blah, blah, blah. So they didn't have to own the opinion themselves, and that was okay in this situation. In another situation, I might have organised it a bit differently. So after they'd read the piece and learnt a bit more about the vocabulary and seen it in context, I got them to do the describing words again, so a second time around, to see if there were any changes, perhaps that they had learned more about that vocabulary, or perhaps they'd seen it in context so they were able just to replicate it. It's just becoming familiar with the words and seeing them there and using them. So I then took both of them and opened the second analysis in another window and put them up on the board so that we could see them. And we had a plenary session and talked about the words and the changes. And it was just interesting to note how they had changed. Even you can see here that the bouncing baby boy is more so here. Some of them didn't change so much and others did. So in summary, to talk about the feedback, I hid the activity until I was ready for the students to use it. I used anonymous mode so they could feel confident and not feel shy if they weren't ready to own those opinions or those the information they'd put there. I initially had it so the students couldn't see the analysis themselves afterwards, so it was just up on the board. And then I was able to share it on the projector so we could have a discussion about it, either them and their groups or with their partners or as a whole class discussion. And it was good to generate discussion and for them to talk about words that they hadn't seen used in that way before. And then using that second window to compare the analyses. And that was, I think it was a nice way to finish the session on a fairly light note, and we could have a bit of a laugh or just a chat about how things had changed after they'd done the reading task. Do you have any questions about that and how I managed that? And do you have any other comments or questions or anything? Because my session is pretty much at the close. That's it. It's short and sweet, but hopefully, oh, that's great, Andy. Good. Do play around with it. Hopefully, it gives you a bit of an idea, so a springboard to perhaps use Moodle in the classroom yourself. Awesome. Okay, great. That's good, Wendy. Well, I hope that people do use it, and Moodle Cloud is great for that kind of thing because you can just pop your things up there whenever you want to, and then back up and then download if you want to keep them for use later, and then put them back again if it's getting too full. Thank you. Thanks very much. I'll see you in about an hour and a half for another session. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for attending.
Thank you, Tish, so much. Yeah, as I said, that was very interesting, and I know there's a lot of people I'm going to encourage to be watching that in the future because of the work they're doing over here. And yeah, as Tish said, she's got a session in an hour and a half. She's doing a second session for us on something different. What was that session on again? I've forgotten.
That's about setting up your own small business.
That's right, very different. So that's fantastic. That's awesome. So thank you so much, Tish. If you have any more questions, don't forget you can use our session forums. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.